The microphones hissed as they swung toward him, a row of red lights blinking like accusation. "Mr. Hale, did you or did you not divert 3 emergency buses for your own purposes during the blackout?" the councilman demanded, voice echoing through the packed chamber. Travis tightened his grip on the worn manila folder in his hands. Inside were route sheets, radio transcripts, fuel logs, his entire defense reduced to paper that suddenly felt very small. On the big screen behind the council dais, a paused security clip showed his face in grainy black and white, frozen mid-gesture in the depot yard. Beneath it, the local station's headline screamed, "Bus driver or opportunist." Phones were raised everywhere. Reporters crowded the aisles. Someone in the back scoffed loud enough for the microphones to pick it up. In the third row, his 7-year-old daughter sat between his sister and an older woman in a navy blazer. Maddie's legs swung nervously too short to touch the floor. The woman beside her, calm, steady, rested a hand over Maddie's fidgeting fingers and gave Travis the smallest nod. He swallowed hard. He could walk away. Let them spin their story. Go back to driving circles around a city that never really saw him. Or he could finally open the folder, lay the truth on the table, and drag every hidden decision from that night out into the light. "Answer the question," the councilman pressed. "Why should this city ever trust you again?" Travis took a breath that tasted like old wood and camera heat and fear. When he spoke, his voice didn't shake. "Because," he said, "I was the only one out there who remembered those people weren't just numbers on a dispatch screen. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight. And hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world." His name was Travis Hale, and long before the council chamber and the headlines, he was just a 37-year-old bus driver trying to keep his kid fed and the lights on in a tired corner of Cleveland, Ohio. He woke up most mornings at 4:15 to an alarm that buzzed like a mosquito in a small 2-bedroom apartment that still held his late wife's coffee mugs in the cabinet. By 5, he was at the depot, signing out Bus 214, greeting the same half-awake drivers with nods and inside jokes that never left the yard. By 6, he was rolling through neighborhoods with cracked sidewalks and boarded-up storefronts carrying hotel housekeepers, line cooks, nursing aides, and high school kids who'd learned to sleep sitting up. To most people, Travis was driver or sir, or nothing at all, just another uniform behind the wheel. They didn't know that before he wore the city logo. He'd worn desert camo running convoy logistics for the army overseas. They didn't know he could look at a map once and remember it, or that he still counted exits in his head to calm himself when the grief crept in. 3 years earlier, cancer had taken his wife fast and mean, leaving him with a shoebox of medical bills and a little girl who clung to his sleeve at night. Maddie was his whole world, bright, stubborn, drawing buses in the margins of her homework and asking questions about everything. He worked extra shifts, skipped lunch, and took every overtime run they'd give him so she could stay in her art program at the community center. Supervisors saw him as solid but forgettable. Reliable enough to call when someone else called in sick, not interesting enough to promote. Riders saw him as the guy who waited an extra 30 seconds when he saw someone running for the bus. The city didn't see him at all. Still, Travis believed in showing up, in keeping the route on time, in getting people home. That was his quiet code. The night everything started to change didn't look special on the schedule. Just a wet Tuesday in late October, gray rain slanting across the depot lights. His name penciled in for an extra late route he hadn't even wanted. He'd just pulled Bus 214 into its slot when he saw her alone on a plastic bench by the vending machines in the driver's lounge, dressed too sharply for a place that smelled like burnt coffee, staring down at her phone with tears she kept wiping away before they could fall. He could have walked past, clocked out, gone home to heat up leftover pasta for Maddie. Instead, Travis paused by the doorway, watched her shoulders rise and fall like someone barely keeping it together, and felt that familiar tug in his chest. "Don't get involved," his tired brain warned. But his feet were already moving toward her. Travis didn't know her name yet. He didn't know why a woman dressed like she belonged in a downtown boardroom was sitting alone in a grimy municipal lounge with her shoulders trembling. All he knew was that something in her expression, lonely cornered, fighting hard not to break, looked painfully familiar. "How can I help?" he asked gently. She blinked, startled, wiped quickly at her cheek, and straightened her posture like she'd just been caught doing something unacceptable. "I'm fine," she whispered. Voice barely steady. He didn't push. He just nodded, offered his clean handkerchief, set it beside her on the bench, and stepped back to give her space. That single moment quiet human was all he could offer before the dispatcher barked his name from across the room. The woman gave a small, grateful nod as he walked off. He didn't think he'd ever see her again. But this city had a strange sense of timing. 2 days later, the whole depot buzzed with a rumor. "Big audit coming. Somebody upstairs is gunning for budget cuts. Heard they're targeting drivers with overtime. No, this one's about emergency protocols. They're looking to blame someone for the blackout mess." Travis barely listened. He had a morning route, a thermos of half-warm coffee, and a daughter who'd left crayon drawings in his lunch bag. They were of little stick-figure buses and a smiling driver with 2 big ears. As he scanned his bus, checking mirrors and latches, one of the supervisors, Stanley Birch, marched up and pointed at bus 214 like it had committed a crime. "You're late logging mileage," Birch snapped. "I logged it last night," Travis said. "No," Birch countered, thrusting a tablet screen in his face. "You logged it wrong." Travis leaned in. The numbers were identical to what he'd written on paper. Except, somebody had altered the digital entry by 1 digit, making it look sloppy. Travis swallowed his irritation. "I can fix it." "You shouldn't have to fix it," Birch shot back. "You should have done it right." The sting wasn't the criticism. It was the tone. Like Birch enjoyed talking down to him, like the uniform made him lesser someone to correct instead of listen to. Behind them, 2 younger drivers chuckled. "One of these days, Hale's gonna run the wrong route and blame the GPS. Guy's always fixing something." Travis ignored them, but a headache crept behind his eyes. He'd been patient for months, years even, but lately the dismissiveness had felt heavier, more pointed. By the time he rolled out for Route 8, the sky had cleared to a pale, wintry blue, but the sour mood stuck with him. Around 3 p.m., as he pulled into Lakeside Depot for his lunch break, his phone buzzed with a text from his sister. School called. Maddie wasn't feeling good. Took her home. She's resting. "Y'all okay?" His stomach tightened. He called immediately. Maddie answered, sounding small. "Daddy?" "Hey, sunshine. Sis told me you were sick. What hurts?" There was a sniff. "My tummy, and my art teacher said I should tell you something, but I didn't want to make you sad." "What's wrong?" he asked, voice softening. "They came to my class," she said. "2 grown-up people. They asked my teacher questions about you, about the buses, about the day when the lights went off in the whole city." Travis felt the blood drain from his face. What exactly did they ask? They asked, if you ever left routes early, or made choices without asking permission. Everyone heard. Her voice broke. Kids were whispering. I didn't like it. He closed his eyes. The district was digging. Hard. "I'm so sorry they bothered you," he murmured. "Did I do something wrong?" she whispered. "No. Never." He meant it. But this bringing his little girl into it was a line he never imagined they'd cross. That evening, as the depot lights dimmed and drivers clocked out, Birch summoned him to the administrative office. "You're being reassigned," Birch said without looking up from his paperwork. "To what route? Not a route? A desk. Temporary clerical duty until further notice." Travis stiffened. "Why?" "There are questions about your actions during the blackout," Birch said. "Specifically those emergency buses you redirected." "I was following protocol," Travis answered, jaw tightening. "People were stranded in the freezing dark. Dispatch wasn't answering. I made a judgment call." "A judgment call?" Birch scoffed. "That's not your job." Travis breathed through his anger. "We evacuated a nursing home. You saw the report. Reports can be written to say anything." Birch finally looked up, eyes cold. "Someone higher up wants to take a look at your decision-making." There it was, the real truth behind the smiles and clipped instructions. Someone wanted a scapegoat. And a bus driver with a clean record, a military background, and a quiet reputation made perfect political cover. "Is there anything else?" Travis asked. "Yes?" Birch slid a folder across the desk. "Be careful what you say during questioning. They're looking closely at you." A chill crept down Travis's spine. "What do you mean?" he asked. Birch hesitated for a fraction of a second, then muttered, "Just watch yourself," before waving him out like an inconvenience. By the next afternoon, whispers followed him everywhere. He rescued folks during the blackout, didn't he? Rescue or freelance heroism? He shouldn't have touched city equipment without authorization. Should have waited for orders. Orders. During a blackout that shut down half the city, where elderly residents were trapped without heat. He wanted to scream. Instead, he clocked in, did the clerical work they assigned, data entry route, confirmations, hours of mindless typing, and kept his head down. But at home, Maddie was quieter than usual. She'd stopped humming while she colored, stopped playing with her clay figures, stopped asking hopeful questions like, "Dad, can we go to the lake on Saturday?" Instead, she watched him with worry that a child her age shouldn't know. "Are you in trouble?" she whispered one night while he tucked her in. "No, sweetheart," he murmured, brushing her hair back. "Sometimes grown-ups get confused about things. I'll fix it." She nodded, but he could see doubt flicker in her little eyes. Someone at school must have said something kids always overheard what adults whispered. When he stepped into the hallway, he leaned against the wall, hand over his face, breathing through the heaviness pressing on his chest. Losing his job meant losing health insurance, losing overtime, losing the future he was trying to build for her. The world had pushed him before, but never like this. 2 days later, the situation worsened. The city initiated a preliminary review hearing. Not quite disciplinary action, but close. Travis knew what that meant. They wanted him nervous, on edge, easier to corner. The hearing would determine whether he'd be suspended or terminated outright. And someone upstairs, someone with influence, seemed eager to make an example of him. He spent that night at the kitchen table with route logs, minute-by-minute radio transcripts, the paperwork from the nursing home evacuation, and his old army training binder that reminded him why he'd made the choices he did. But for every document he laid out, doubt crept deeper. He could justify every decision. He could prove he saved lives. He could recount everything with military precision. And still, they could spin it however they wanted. His chest tightened. He pushed back from the table and turned off the kitchen light. The morning of the hearing, the depot's conference room was packed. Supervisors, HR reps, a few city officials. All pressed into metal chairs, murmuring, glancing his way, then whispering behind their hands. He recognized one of them, a sharply dressed woman he'd never met before, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against her folder. Her badge read, "Emergency Operations Commission." She didn't look thrilled to be there. "Mr. Hale," she said coolly, "we'll begin shortly." Travis nodded, but a knot formed in his throat. He didn't fear confrontation, not after convoys in hostile regions, not after watching his wife fade in a hospital room. But this slow dismantling of his character, of his integrity, of the one thing he'd always held on to being dependable, this was harder. Then the door opened again, and something unexpected happened. Every head turned. A familiar woman walked in. The same woman who'd been crying in the driver's lounge days earlier, though now she looked composed, businesslike, carrying a leather portfolio with quiet power. She didn't glance at anyone except him. And in her expression was something he hadn't seen in weeks. Recognition. And a flicker, just a flicker of trust. The room whispered. Who is she? She's with EOC. No, she outranks them. What's she doing here? The tension grew heavy enough to touch. The hearing officer cleared his throat. Let's begin. And for the first time, Travis felt the tide shift. Not yet, not fully, but something was coming. Something big. Something that would crack the floor beneath this entire room. He straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin, and faced the panel. The pressure had reached its breaking point, and the next words spoken in that room would change everything. The conference room door clicked shut behind the last council aide, and the air inside tightened like a held breath. The long table, the microphones, the stack of binders, everything seemed to close in on Travis as the hearing officer cleared his throat for the formal opening. The woman he'd helped days ago, now composed, polished, unreadable, took a seat near the back, her portfolio open, pen poised. Mr. Hale, the officer began. Today, we will review your actions during the citywide blackout. We are evaluating whether your decisions violated procedure, endangered public resources, or compromised emergency operations. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. The officer continued. We have testimony suggesting you diverted 3 emergency buses without authorization. Travis opened his folder, fingers steady despite the tension crushing his ribcage. With all due respect, he said those buses were never being used. They were sitting in the depot. People at Glenwood Nursing were trapped without heat. Dispatch was overwhelmed. One committee member interrupted sharply. Protocol requires a second committee member cut in. Protocol is not optional, especially not during a crisis. Another voice joined. Why did you believe you were qualified to make that decision? Hale. That tone, sharp, dismissive, the same one he'd heard from Birch, landed hard. Before Travis could answer, the room shook. Not metaphorically, literally. The lights flickered. Someone gasped. A deep, mechanical groan echoed through the building, metal straining under weight. Then an explosion of sound boomed from below the floor. A transformer. Or worse. The walls rattled. Ceiling tiles trembled. Dust rained down. Someone shouted, "What the hell was that?" Another voice cried. Something hit the parking deck. The power cut out completely. Emergency lights flashed to life in thin red strips along the baseboards. Panic burst across the room like wildfire. City officials scrambling, shoving chairs back, fumbling for phones that had lost service. Travis stood instantly, instincts snapping into place. From the hallway came screams, the kind that froze your blood. A young clerk burst in face white. The east stairwell collapsed. There are people trapped in the garage. The committee members looked at each other, helpless. The hearing officer tried to maintain control. Everyone stay here. Emergency services will— No, they won't, Travis said sharply. Not fast enough. All eyes snapped to him. He remembered the blackout. He remembered the convoy wreck overseas. He remembered kneeling beside his wife when she couldn't breathe. Sometimes waiting meant dying. He moved toward the door. "Mr. Hale, you cannot leave this room," the officer barked. Travis ignored him completely. From the back, the woman from the lounge rose. "Let him go." Her voice had force more than anyone else in the room. Heads turned. They hesitated. But Travis was already in the hallway. The stairwell was cracked open like a split rib cage. Concrete dust floated in the air like chalk in a gymnasium. A section of the landing had collapsed, leaving a jagged opening down into the parking deck below. Lights flickered. Smoke curled up from somewhere deeper. He crawled to the edge. Below, a sedan sat crumpled under a fallen concrete beam. The driver's side door was crushed, trapping someone inside. A woman screamed, banging on the glass with a bloodied hand. Beside her, another person, a teenager, was pinned, but conscious chest heaving sobs sounding like choking. A second beam hung overhead, cracked, but not fallen. One good vibration, and it would come down. A small group of workers and clerks stood frozen at the top of the stairwell, staring down in horror. We need firefighters," one stammered. "They'll take 20 minutes, another cried. Travis didn't waste breath on debate. He climbed through the broken railing. "Sir," someone yelled. "You can't go down there." He already was. He lowered himself slowly, gripping exposed rebar, ignoring the pain slicing his palm. The drop wasn't long, but the floor was unstable. Dust made each step slippery. He reached the first victim. The woman's breath came in panicked bursts. "Help, oh God, help! I'm here," he said, voice steady. "Look at me. I've got you." His tone anchored her enough that she stopped thrashing. He pulled at the bent door frame, but it didn't budge. The concrete beam had twisted the metal inward. He needed leverage. He scanned the rubble saw, a broken length of pipe, half buried under debris. He grabbed it, wedged it into the door seam, and heaved with every ounce of strength his body held. His shoulders burned. His arms shook. Metal groaned. The door shifted half an inch. Again he muttered to himself. He pushed past the tremor in his hands and shoved the pipe deeper. Muscles screaming, he dragged the door outward. The hinge snapped. The woman slumped toward him, sobbing in relief. He pulled her free. Above him, debris shifted ominously. Someone shouted, "The beam is cracking." He turned to the teenager pinned beneath the dashboard. The kid couldn't be older than 16. Their leg was crushed under the console skin, pale with shock. "Hey," Travis said softly. "Stay with me." "My leg," the teen whimpered. "I can't. I know," he soothed. "I'm going to lift the dash. When I tell you to move, you move." "It's too heavy," the kid cried. "I've lifted heavier," he said. He planted both feet, braced his legs, gripped the edge of the dashboard, and lifted with his entire body the way he'd been trained. The kind of lift you don't do unless someone's life depends on it. Pain tore across his back. Something popped in his shoulder. The dashboard rose 2 inches. Now he barked. The kid yanked their leg free with a scream. The dashboard slammed down as soon as the weight shifted. The whole car rocked. The teenager crawled toward him, sobbing. Overhead, the cracked beam groaned louder, a sound like thunder in slow motion. It was going to fall. And if it did, the entire floor might come down. "Everyone out!" Travis yelled. But the clerks and employees at the top of the stairwell were frozen, torn between flight and terror. Travis grabbed both victims by the arms. "Move!" He half-carried, half-dragged them up the broken incline, slipping once and catching himself on exposed rebar. Dust filled his mouth. A low rumble vibrated through the concrete. Behind them, the beam split. A jagged sound ripped through the air. He pushed the teenager upward. "Go climb!" They scrambled up the broken stairs. He shoved the woman behind them. He grabbed the rail and climbed after them, pulling himself up as the floor gave one shudder. The beam fell. A blast of air hit his back. He dove forward. Concrete crashed behind him in a deafening roar as dust exploded upward. Hands grabbed him, multiple hands, as people at the top yanked him through the wrecked opening just as the staircase below collapsed completely. For one moment, the world was silent except for coughing and the soft sound of settling debris. Then someone whispered, breathless, "He saved them." The victims were ushered down the hallway toward medics who'd arrived from another wing. The teenager looked back, eyes wide, meeting Travis's gaze with something like awe. The woman he'd freed from the car leaned against a paramedic, shaking uncontrollably. "You pulled the door off," she whispered hoarsely. "You, thank you." He nodded faintly, throat burning with dust. That was when he noticed her. The woman from the driver's lounge, the one whose shoulders had trembled days before, stood only a few feet away, staring at him. But this time her expression wasn't grateful or sad or guarded. It was stunned. Not because he'd climbed into a collapsing stairwell. Not because he'd lifted steel with his bare hands. Not because he'd risked his life for two strangers. She looked at him like she'd just seen a man the world had misjudged terribly. He straightened slowly, still catching his breath. Around her, council members, supervisors, even Birch had fallen into uneasy silence. One official muttered, he just ran in there." Another voice trembled. "He saved 2 people before emergency services even arrived." And from the back, someone whispered the question that hung heavy in the charged air. "Why is this man sitting in a disciplinary hearing?" No one had an answer. Not yet. But they were about to. The woman stepped forward, portfolio in hand, her voice clear and ringing down the ruined hallway. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I think it's time we talk about your actions, not from fear, but from truth." The power dynamic had shifted so fast the room seemed to tilt. Everyone was staring at the man they'd tried to tear apart. And for the first time since the blackout, Travis felt something shift inside him. Not victory, not relief. Something deeper. A quiet knowledge that the moment he'd chosen to act, the moment he risked everything because people needed him, had changed the trajectory of this entire story. And nothing would be the same after this. Dust still drifted through the hallway like pale smoke as medics hurried past with stretchers. The collapsed stairwell crackled occasionally, settling into a new and dangerous stillness. People huddled near the wall, coughing into sleeves, exchanging shell-shocked glances. But their eyes kept drifting toward one man, toward Travis. Moments earlier, they'd watched him disappear into the broken stairwell, like he had nothing left to lose. Now, he stood there bleeding from his forearm shirt, torn at the shoulder chest, rising and falling with harsh breaths. He didn't grandstand, didn't look around for praise. He just quietly made sure the 2 people he'd saved were stable, before stepping back, wiping the dust from his face. The teenager on the stretcher looked up at him through tear-streaked cheeks. "You." "Didn't even hesitate," they whispered. He didn't know how to answer, so he just gave a small nod. Behind him, a group of city officials whispered urgently, "That lift. Did you see him lift that dashboard? He shouldn't even be walking after that. Who is this guy?" "He's a bus driver," someone muttered, as if trying to make sense of it. But the title didn't fit anymore, not after what they had witnessed. Travis didn't notice them. He stepped to the side, bracing a hand on the wall, as the adrenaline drained out of him, leaving a tremor in his legs. His eyes stung from dust. His shoulder throbbed sharply. Still, he stayed upright, scanning for anyone else needing help. From behind, a calm voice said, "Mr. Hale." He turned. It was her, the woman he'd comforted in the lounge, now standing with an air that wasn't just authority, but something heavier. Purpose. Resolve. She wasn't trembling anymore. Her posture was straight, jaw set, eyes clear. "You saved 2 lives," she said softly. "They were right there," he answered, almost apologetically. "Anyone would have—" "No," she said, stepping closer. "Most people freeze. Most people run. You ran toward danger." For a long moment, she simply looked at him, not with gratitude, with recognition. The hearing officer finally pushed through the crowd, face red and shaken. "Mr. Hale, we need to resume the hearing. Procedures must—" "No," the woman interrupted sharply. Every head turned at the sound of her voice. Even the medics paused. Resuming the hearing, she repeated, "After he just risked his life, after he did your job, my job and emergency services job before anyone here could get a sentence out," the officer sputtered. "Ma'am, I don't think you have the authority to, I do," she said calmly. "More than you realize." She pulled a badge from inside her blazer. The room shifted as though the floor tilted. Bold letters gleamed under the emergency lights. Director, Cleveland Emergency Response Commission. Murmurs erupted. "That's the director. She's the one who oversees all emergency operations." "Oh my God." Travis blinked. He had no idea. He'd thought she was some city administrator, maybe someone's counsel or aide, but she wasn't. She was the top of the chain, the one who reviewed crisis reports, the one who decided who got commendations and who got blamed. She faced the room, her voice sharp as glass. "I came here this morning to observe your review process. I wanted to see whether the accusations against Mr. Hale were legitimate." The hearing panel stiffened. Birch's face drained to a sickly shade. But now she continued, "I have much bigger questions." She lifted her portfolio. "In this file," she said, "I have every radio transcript from the blackout. I have eyewitness testimony from the Glenwood nursing staff. I have time-stamped GPS data from the buses Mr. Hale redirected. And I have dispatch logs showing exactly when the system went down." The room fell silent, except for the distant hiss of ruptured pipes. She looked directly at the council members. Mr. Hale made a decision based on incomplete information during a crisis. A decision that evacuated 32 elderly residents who would have frozen in the dark if he had waited for a permission that never came. A gasp rippled across the gathered crowd. "He didn't violate protocol," she said. "He filled the gap when the protocol collapsed." Travis felt his breath catch in his throat. He had spent weeks wondering if he would ever be believed. "And here's the part none of you considered," she added, lifting a second folder. Her eyes met his. Mr. Hale didn't just guess what to do. He knew what to do. She pulled out a document and handed it to the hearing officer, who unfolded it with trembling hands. The print was crisp. "United States Army Transportation Corps," the officer read aloud. "Convoy Logistics Specialist. Bronze Star. Commendation for crisis evacuation under fire." The crowd erupted with shocked whispers. Travis closed his eyes. He didn't talk about that part of his life. He had buried the medals in a shoebox behind winter coats. He drove buses. He raised his daughter. He tried to forget the sandstorms, the explosions, the nights he guided military transports through blackouts that made this city's chaos look mild. The director spoke softly now, her eyes still on him. "You never told anyone." "Wasn't relevant," he murmured, throat tightening. "It was," she said, "but not for the reasons you think." She turned back to the committee. This man was trained to make life and death calls in the field. Calls that save people when red tape slows everything else. Today, he proved that training wasn't luck. She gestured toward the wreckage behind them. "You all saw what he did." No one argued. Even Birch, who had spent months picking at every small mistake, couldn't meet his gaze. And now, she said, "We're going to talk about why a decorated veteran with exemplary crisis instincts was nearly suspended for doing the right thing." The hearing officer swallowed hard. "There, There was evidence of unauthorized evidence manufactured by someone who wanted to protect themselves, she snapped. The room froze. During the blackout, she continued opening her portfolio again. 2 dispatch supervisors clocked out early and left junior staff with incomplete handoff notes. Mr. Hale's actions made their failure glaringly obvious. A few gasps broke the air. So she said someone tried to shift blame. Someone pulled his mileage logs. Someone altered entries by single digits. Someone filed an anonymous complaint. Someone even contacted his daughter's school. Multiple people looked sick. Birch's shoulders slumped. "I don't need a confession," the director said. "The digital trail is already there." She let the portfolio fall shut. Which brings me to my final point. She stepped toward Travis until they were only a few feet apart. "You were in that stairwell," she said softly, before anyone else even processed the danger. He looked away, uncomfortable with all the attention. Why, she asked, not accusing, just wanting to understand. He exhaled slowly. Because people were screaming. And that was enough. It was enough, he said. But that wasn't all of it. Images surfaced in his mind. His wife, pale and weak in the hospital bed. The night he'd held her hand while alarms blared in the hallway, and no nurse came for what felt like hours. The helplessness he swore he would never feel again. "I promised myself," he whispered, voice tight, "that when people needed help, I wouldn't wait." The director's expression softened with something like grief. Then she turned to the committee, her voice regaining its strength. "I'm removing Mr. Hale from administrative review, effective immediately." Everyone froze. And furthermore, she added, "I'm offering him a position on the Emergency Response Commission as a field operations liaison, part-time to start with full benefits. His crisis instincts are exactly what this city needs." A stunned silence fell. The same people who had looked down on him, supervisors, officials, administrators, now stared like they didn't know who they were looking at. A bus driver, a veteran, a man who had saved lives twice in 2 crises. The woman he had comforted days earlier offered a small, genuine smile. The power dynamic in that hallway had flipped entirely, and it wasn't done flipping yet. The director looked at him. "Mr. Hale, will you consider joining us?" He didn't speak for a long moment. Somewhere down the hall, paramedics wheeled out the teenager he'd saved. They lifted a hand in a quiet wave. His shoulder ached. His throat tightened. His pulse hammered with leftover adrenaline. He thought about Maddie at home, worried sick, thinking her father was in trouble. He thought about the promises he'd made to himself after his wife died. He thought about a city that needed someone who would run toward danger instead of away from it. Finally, he answered. What exactly, he asked quietly, would the job require? The director's smile widened just slightly. Being the person you were today. The hallway brightened as emergency lights flickered back to life. A decision, one that would change everything, waited on the tip of the next breath. The director's offer didn't linger in the air for long. By the time they moved everyone from the damaged hallway into a safer wing of the building, the tone toward Travis had transformed completely. Supervisors who once avoided eye contact now approached him with tentative handshakes. City officials who had whispered about protocol violations stood a little straighter when he walked by. Even Birch, stiff and pale, muttered something that might have been an apology, though it came out in fragments like a man trying to swallow his own pride. The hearing itself was suspended indefinitely. The accusations, those small, needling doubts that had followed him for weeks, evaporated under the weight of truth. The 2 dispatch supervisors who abandoned their posts the night of the blackout were removed pending investigation. A junior clerk who'd altered digital logs admitted to doing so at someone else's direction. The director made sure every piece of manipulation was documented, but none of that seemed to matter as much as the people whose lives he'd pulled from the wreckage. The woman from the crushed sedan found him before she was taken to the hospital. She gripped his hand, trembling, and said only, "Thank you for giving me another day." The teenager leg wrapped in gauze and eyes still red managed a small nod as paramedics wheeled them out. Those reactions, raw and human, cut through the noise more than any official statement ever could. When the building was finally cleared, the director handed him her card. "We'll formalize the offer by morning," she said. "Field operations liaison, flexible hours, full benefits, and the chance to help shape how this city responds to crisis. Consider it more than a job, Mr. Hale. Consider it a way to turn what you've lived through into something that protects others." He stared at the card, feeling something shift deep in his chest, a quiet settling like the world finally recognizing a truth he'd carried alone for years. That night he limped into his apartment, still coated in dust. Maddie ran to him instantly, small arms wrapping around his waist. "Dad, they said something happened. Are you okay? Did they fire you? Are you hurt?" He crouched down, ignoring the pull in his shoulder. "I'm all right, sweetheart. And no, they didn't fire me." He showed her the card. She traced the letters with one finger. "Are they giving you a new job?" "Maybe something even better," he said. She looked up, eyes shining with relief. "I knew you didn't do anything wrong." He pulled her into a hug, letting her cling to him, feeling for the first time in a long while like the world wasn't stacked against them. 3 months later, the city felt different to him. Not because the skyline changed or the bus routes shifted, but because he didn't walk through it invisible anymore. As the new field operations liaison, Travis worked with emergency planners, depot leaders, and shelter coordinators. His job was to bridge the gap between paperwork and real life, between the people in suits and the people on the ground who actually lived the consequences of crisis decisions. Some days he trained dispatch teams on practical route management. Other days he visited community centers, teaching volunteers how to stabilize chaotic situations until first responders arrived. And some mornings he still drove bus 214. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Sitting behind that wheel reminded him where he came from and who he served. The director checked in often. Their partnership grew into one of mutual respect, marked by long conversations, shared frustration at bureaucracy, and a quiet understanding that neither of them had reached their positions by accident. She never forgot the night he offered her a handkerchief. He never forgot that she saw him when it counted. As for Birch, the man found plenty of time to reflect when the investigation into the manipulated logs reached its conclusion. His demotion came quietly, almost politely. Travis never gloated. He just shook the man's hand when Birch finally approached him at a staff meeting and murmured, "I misjudged you." "Most people do," Travis replied gently. "Try not to next time." His words weren't sharp, just honest. At home, life softened. Maddie's stomach aches faded. She bragged to her classmates that her dad helped fix emergencies, though Travis reminded her he was still just learning. She drew new pictures, ones of fire engines, buses, big hearts with "Dad" written inside. He hung every one of them on the refrigerator. Some nights when the city was quiet, he'd step onto the balcony with a cup of coffee and watch the lights spread out across the skyline. He didn't think of the convoy wreck anymore. He didn't think of the helpless terror inside his wife's hospital room. He didn't think of failure. He thought of the stairwell, of the dashboard he'd lifted, of the kid who made it home because he didn't wait for permission to do the right thing. He thought of Maddie asleep down the hall, safe and growing. And he thought of the simple truth the director voiced on the day everything changed, being who you already are, can sometimes be the job. In the end, the city didn't build a statue for him or give him a medal. They didn't rename a street or hold a parade. That wasn't how Cleveland worked. Instead, something quieter happened. Something better. When people in the department argued about protocol, someone inevitably asked what would Hale do in a blackout, and the room would settle. When a dispatcher panicked during a sudden power surge, they called Travis for clarity. When the nursing home staff held a reunion for everyone rescued that winter, they mailed an invitation with his name handwritten at the top. And every time a crisis plan was updated, one line appeared near the bottom, an unofficial motto adopted by the team: "Don't wait for someone else to care. Be the one." On a warm spring afternoon, the director joined him on a walk along the lakefront after a long meeting. They watched gulls drift above the water, the sun throwing gold across the waves. She asked him how the job felt now that he'd settled in. He thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. "It feels like I finally caught up to who I was supposed to be." She nodded, understanding more deeply than he expected. In the quiet between them, something unspoken settled: respect, possibility, maybe even a beginning. And as the wind came off the water, he realized the weight he'd carried for years had finally lifted. Sometimes the world didn't need grand heroes. Sometimes it just needed one man to run toward a cry for help. And sometimes, if he was lucky, that man found a way to build a life from those moments, one steady choice at a time. In a city full of millions, Travis Hale had learned a truth older than any rule book. Courage isn't loud. Courage is steady. And courage can turn an ordinary life into something that matters.